The reason I'm here is because I was part of a team that exposed Larry Nassar, who was a famous gymnastics doctor in the U.S. and is now in prison for 175 years for molesting more than 300 young women and girls, including some of America's top gymnasts. And I'm here, one of the reasons probably is because I'm the only person that interviewed Larry Nassar before he was arrested. And it was very brief, but and Larry Nassar's the reason for my 15 minutes of fame that I've outlived already. I'm probably in my 27th or 28th minute. But as in all investigations, when we started this project, I didn't know who Larry Nassar was. We were looking at lots of other people, and I think it's a lesson in journalism. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but I want to back up. And I'm with the Indianapolis Star newspaper. We're in Indianapolis, Indiana. We're a small city market. I worked on this project with two other reporters, Mark Alicia and Marissa Kwiatkowski, and Marissa's actually in Brazil today talking about the project too. So again, we've kind of had some renown, I think partly due to our president and his proclamations of fake news. And when Larry Nassar was sentenced, the prosecutor was very kind in making some statements that he'd still be out molesting girls if it weren't for the investigative reporters, and America needs investigative reporters, and the rest of the world needs investigative reporters more now so than ever. And so that's kind of what brought us to become darlings for a short period of time. Before that, I was out there in the crowd with you for the last 40 years. I'm old, and I'm much more comfortable listening to other people tell me how to do things than to tell you how to do things. And I'll talk a little bit about nuts and bolts, and I'll hang around. If you have specific questions that I don't go deep enough, I'll be glad to talk to you. I love to talk about journalism. I've been doing it for 40 years. And I'd talk to you about our project or questions you have about that, or I'd also be happy to talk about projects that you're working on, things you're struggling with. There's some obviously universal issues that we all struggle with, and then there are some that are going to be very specific to where you're from, like the prior speaker in India. Those are issues that I can be of no help, but if some basic journalism stuff, I'd be happy to talk about that. So again, I'm an old school journalist, and I've been dragged kicking and screaming into the age of technology and data and all that. So. But this project that started out was very much a local project. It became an international story. And it started with two schools in the city of Indianapolis where teachers were molesting students. And both of those cases, the school people would say that teachers were having an affair with a student. Well, there's no such thing as having an affair with a child that you're under control of. So, but in both those cases, they waited before they notified police or authorities. And in one of the cases, they tried to cover it up completely, and they call in America passing the trash. They got the teacher, they got him to resign and moved him on to another job. And I've been writing about child abuse and child welfare since 2000, and it's such a common problem is that every state in America, I don't know about around the world, but has laws that if you know a child is being abused or you suspect a child is being abused, you are supposed to report it. And it's a minor crime, it's a misdemeanor in America. It's like breaking into a vending machine, the same kind of charge, a fine and maybe a month in jail at the most. But it's just an ongoing problem. And for 15 years, I've been writing about that. And Marissa Kwiatkowski, my colleague, has been writing about child welfare. And so this story started out looking at why people aren't reporting child and sexual abuse. And it started with these two teachers in Indianapolis. And as Marissa and our team was starting to look at it, someone said, you need to look at USA Gymnastics. And USA Gymnastics is the governing body for the sport of gymnastics. They pick the Olympic team, they train the Olympians, they set the rules for the sport, they have member gyms. If you have a child that you have Olympic dreams or scholarship dreams, or you have to get them in a USA Gymnastics program at 4 or whatever, and they go up through the ranks. And USA Gymnastics is based in Indianapolis. So once again, this was just strictly a local story. And as we started that, we knew, as in all sports and youth sports, where there are adults and where there are children and they're alone together, pedophiles tend to be attracted. And so we knew there were coaches who were molesting kids. And that wasn't a news story, but what we found very quickly was in a court case in Georgia. We went down there and pulled some records that they were getting ready to seal, and the tip was, you need to look at USA Gymnastics, and you need to look very quickly. There's some documents in a court case in Georgia, and they're going to be sealed shortly from public sight. And so our editor put Marissa on the plane that night. She went down and got these records, and it wasn't just that kids were being molested. That wasn't the news story. The story that we found in that over 1,000 pages of documents, she just got a dump and photocopied everything that was in the court record. There were snippets of depositions from officials that laid out their policy and procedures and showed that they didn't always report these abuses as they were supposed to. And that they had a policy, unless the victim came to them or the victim's parent came to them with a signed complaint, they would not investigate the abuse, they would not report the abuse. So if another coach came and said, hey, my friend is abusing these children, they turned a blind eye on it, which is against the law. And again, so that was our focus of our story as we started out. And journalistically, what we wanted to do, that's a great peg, you know, that they have a policy that allows kids to be abused and they ignore abuse. But we wanted to take it and show that it wasn't just a philosophical issue, that there was a cause and effect to it. So from there, we divided up, the three of us divided up about 300 coaches and officials in the world of gymnastics that we found through court databases. We Googled, we spent weeks Googling, gymnastics coach arrested, gymnastics coach molested, gymnastics molesting, and found cases across America. And we found about 300 cases where we thought there was a chance that USA Gymnastics maybe knew about these coaches before, and then let them move along, and they went back to molest other kids, because that's what we wanted. We wanted to find that they had been reported to the organization had done nothing, and these molesters had gone on to harm other children, because then you had cause and effect, and it was more than just a philosophical argument at that point. So we spent from April of 2016 to August of 2016 working through these and whittling it down, and thousands of pages, tens of thousands of pages of court records. We traveled across the country. We had the benefit, and in America, and I'm sure other places the same thing, their newsrooms are tightening, budgets are collapsing, and we had just the opposite experiences. We said we wanted to go to California. How much is a plane ticket? You know, and you go tomorrow. And we were very lucky in that realm, because we had an editor at the time who saw the value in this story. That's not the case broadly across the U.S. I would suspect probably a lot of you do the same thing. It's like, can you get it via email? Can you put a FOIA request in? So anyhow, we've whittled down these 300-some coaches to about 100, and we found that they fit that pattern of somebody who had at least been reported to USA Gymnastics, nothing had been done to them, and they moved on to somewhere else. And then from there, we found 4 very solid cases where they went on to harm kids and sexually abuse kids. And I use those terms, harm, and that's not strong enough. I mean, they devastate these children's lives, and anyone who's been around abuse survivors knows that. So it's easier for me to talk about that way when I don't have to I can kind of emotionally separate from it. But so we worked on our first stories, and very interestingly, Indianapolis is a small, big city, but it prides itself on being a sports city, and they're trying to be the amateur sports capital of America. The NCAA, which oversees college sports, is located there. USA Gymnastics is located there. USA Diving is located there. A number of amateur sports organizations are part of a sports industrial complex, and the city fathers have brought them in, have given them tax breaks, and they have the ear of the public. So about July, started in April, about July, we get a call from a local police officer who says, hey, these guys are barking up the wrong tree. He tells another police reporter, and he says, they need to meet with me and I'll set them straight. So we met with this police officer the same day at a Starbucks, and he told us how we were wrong. He had investigated one of the school incidents that started the whole thing, and said, oh, these are separate incidents. And he said, very intimidating but not threatening, that we'd be making a huge mistake if we went ahead with this story. And it was obviously he was trying to dissuade us. And partway through, one of us mentioned the president of USA Gymnastics was a guy named Steve Penny, and he said, you know, and I don't know if it was me or Mark, who said, well, you know, Penny said this in court, and he goes, oh, you mean Steve? And we kind of stood back like that because, and the guy then realized we kind of, everybody just kind of froze, and it turned out that this police officer is a good personal friend of the head of USA Gymnastics and had taken it upon himself to kind of drive us away from doing our story. And subsequently, and I'm going to pause here for a minute, you know, that was 2+ years ago. At the time, we didn't know about Larry Nassar. We didn't know about many other transgressions that they paid off gymnasts millions of dollars who had been molested, some of the Olympic gymnasts, that they had all this stuff bubbling under the surface. We knew there was a problem. We saw the tip of the iceberg. But now we've done FOIAs. We found email exchanges between that police officer, other police officers, the prosecutor, writing press releases to get USA Gymnastics to sign off on a police department press release saying, USA Gymnastics is swell, everyone. They've done everything perfectly. They love children. And so there was all this kind of stuff going underground that we didn't know at the time, but it was so, we were hitting so many roadblocks from people that, again, Marissa and I had covered child abuse and, since 2000. She had since about 2008. And it was just so strange because everyone who would normally say, oh, this is terrible, you know, you err on the side of the child. If there's any question in whether you need to report a child abuse to authorities, you know, you err on the side of the child. They have no agency. You need to be their representative. And all these people who would normally tell us that in other stories were saying, oh, no big deal, nothing going on. The lady who made these complaints was crazy, or this or that. And, you know, we knew there was something there, but again, it was just simmering under the surface. What we didn't know was a year before we had started, or 6 months before we started this reporting, they had discovered that Larry Nassar was molesting children and had hidden it, and had quietly let Larry Nassar write a Facebook post how he was retiring to spend more time with his family, which, as all of us journalists know, that's a sign that something's wrong. If it's you know, I love my family, but I'm not going to retire to spend more time with my family. So I made for a better opportunity, but so we went through all that, and we struggled, and we got into a lawsuit in the case in Georgia. They were closing the records, and we thought there was a public interest in unsealing these records, including complaint files that they'd secretly kept on 54 coaches, and they had these were entered as part of the evidence in the case, and the judge had sealed them. So we got into a court fight there in June in 2016 in Georgia, and our paper spent thousands of dollars again. We cut travel for sports and other things. It was amazing the support that they gave us, and we ultimately won those court files in July, but they appealed, and it went to the state Supreme Court, and we won again. They appealed again, and we finally got them months later. But our first story, because of all the delays and the fighting, our first story ran on August 4th, which people say, oh, that was the greatest timing. It was the night before the Olympics started in Rio. But the reporters on the team, and even our editors, we had really hoped to run that story in June or July. We didn't want to dump it on the night of the Olympics. It was good for PR probably and good for attention, but also at that time we were talking about kids who were club athletes. These were, you know, our kids who were tumblers or you know, they're never going to be the world-class gymnasts, and we didn't want to all of a sudden try to put all this pressure on these young women, great young women from America who've spent their whole lives and have a 4-year window, maybe an 8-year window to hit an Olympics or hit a world championship. And we didn't want to put this on them. We had no idea at that time that Simone Biles and Gabby Douglas and Allie Reisman were among those that had been abused. Again, we were looking at kids in clubs in Georgia and in Indianapolis, and just, you know, average kids who were never going to be star gymnasts. So our story ran August 4th, 2016. One of the benefits we have, we're owned by Gannett, the largest newspaper publisher in America. Lots of people don't like our company, and there are reasons for that, and there are reasons to like our company, and I'll leave it at that. But one of the great things was we had our story published in dozens of papers across the country. It was in USA Today. We ended up writing 3 versions of the first story. Our long 100 and some inch investigative piece, kind of what we call an AP version that was maybe 20 inches that you could pop in any paper, and then a mid-range for papers that were in regions where maybe there was a coach or there was an issue. So we ran 3 of those. So we had got a very broad spread on our first day story. And before noon that day, we got an email from a young lady in Louisville, Kentucky. Her name is Rachel Denhollander, and she said, I know your stories were about coaches who abused athletes. I have a story about a doctor. I was abused by a gymnastics doctor when I was a girl in Michigan years ago. She said, and kind of basically came down to saying, if you're interested, that's great. If you're not, I understand. And the doctor's name was Larry Nassar, who was not among that 300 and some people we'd looked at. And we mainly focused on coaches. We knew who Larry Nassar was. He was a big name in American circles in the 2012 Olympics. There was an Olympian, Carrie Strug, who was injured, and she did a vault. It was all TV. They'd already won the gold medal, but they didn't tell you that on TV, at least in America. And she did a vault and was injured, and Bella Caroli carries her off. She's this tiny little, and he hands her off to Larry Nassar. And there's an iconic image of Bella Caroli, the Olympic hero coach, handing Carrie off to Nassar. And that's what most people knew about Nassar. So, we'd already had a budget of stories at that time. We had about 8 more stories we were going to roll out over the next 4 or 5 months. And our editors were a little reluctant. The story was pretty wild. Rachel, the good thing about her was she was an attorney. She wasn't practicing, but she'd been to law school, and she was a stay-at-home mother. She was very well organized. She had her medical records. She was very well spoken and very credible. She was one of about 20 people who reached out to us the first day of our story with allegations about coaches and other officials. So as we do everything, we divvied them up among our team and started going down the rabbit hole, following up on them. And Mark Alicia went down to meet with Rachel in Louisville, which is about 150 miles or so from us, which wasn't a bad haul, and came back and said, I think there's something to that. She's very, she seems very genuine. She's got her medical records. She's very detail oriented, and our editors were very concerned, and rightly so, because Nassar was a doctor, and they were very concerned that he was doing a legitimate medical procedure. He's an osteopathic physician, which involves manipulation, and there's more hands-on than a general medical doctor or MD in the U.S. And so, our big fear was, and our editor's big fear was, this is going to get bogged down into a he said, she said. It's going to get bogged down into a fight over medical terminology and procedures and what's legitimate and what isn't. And so, I immediately jumped in and started researching what a doctor would do in those types of procedures. And one of my other claim to fame, I believe I'm the first person to have said intravaginal on live TV in America. And so Nassar was doing intravaginal procedures. Myofascial release was the medical term to help these young gymnasts, even gymnasts with shoulder pain and ankle pain, and I'm not sure how all those bones are connected. I know there was a song as kids, so maybe they are some connection, but quickly I learned what's the standard procedure for that. You wear gloves. If you have a minor, you have a parent in the room who's observing. If you tell the minor or the patient at the time, okay, now I'm, because it starts with an exterior massage and tension release, and then he does the penetration is in this rare procedure. And at that time, if you were going to penetrate the young woman, you would say, okay, now this is going to be uncomfortable. Here's what I'm going to do. You very carefully explain it. And Rachel's story was just no gloves, none of that. Her mom was in the room, but Nassar positioned himself at a strange position. And our editors say, we got these other stories. We got these other 6 or 8 stories. When they're great stories, we got to keep working on them. But there was something about Nassar that the 3 of the reporters. And by this time, it was kind of like us against the world, because we were getting beat up from the local police and the powers that be in our city. And so we kind of, that's us against the world mentality. So we kept dutifully working on our other stories, but we're pulling string on Nassar. And about a week later, we got another email from a young lady in New York State. She told us the same story about Larry Nassar, independent. She did not know Rachel Denhollander. They'd never crossed paths. Rachel had just been a club gymnast, had never been a national or internet or regional level gymnast. And her story was so strikingly similar that we actually backgrounded them at that point. We didn't know that they did not know each other. And it sounded almost to the point of, there's a conspiracy here to smear this good doctor. You know, could that be a possibility? Their stories, no gloves. He didn't tell me what he was going to do. He just suddenly, he's penetrating me in the name of healing me. And one of the things I learned is that this rare intravaginal procedure is typically not used. It's more used on middle-aged women. It's a pelvic floor kind of issue. A 12-year-old gymnast is not going to need this kind of treatment, especially for a sore shoulder or a knee injury. And so once we had two of them, we became very adamant that we need to do this story. We need to forget. We'll work on these other stories, and we're promising our editors, and you know, we're going to get this one. We're going to get this one. But this is a big story, you know, and this is a doctor. He's a renowned guy, and again, our editors were saying, yeah, but it's going to get bogged down in medicine and medical terms and all this, and you know, it's going to be an incremental story, and we need to move on, and we need to keep going. So we've got these good stories out in front of us, and within a few days from there, we got another call from an attorney representing a young woman in California, the exact same story. No gloves, no warning, the digital penetration for unlikely reasons. And at that point, it was like, okay, these three different parts of America, from the East Coast to the West Coast to the Heartland, the three people who didn't know each other are telling us the exact same story. And that story doesn't line up with what best practices would be in the procedure. So we shifted gears at that point, and a couple of journalistic tips. I emailed Nassar, who was on the staff at Michigan State University, so it's a public university, and my email to him was later released in a FOIA request. So be careful what you write in emails, especially if they're going to someone's public address. Fortunately, I wasn't embarrassed by anything in my email, and it was quoted in Deadspin and Cosmopolitan. A bunch of people quoted my email. It's like, whew. So just be careful. And we also got attacked for taking a letter to the home of a USA Gymnastics official in court. They said we were harassing her, and so they were attacking us. And so our attorney got up and read the letter and said, in the interest of fairness and in accuracy, we want to give you every opportunity to speak. We've called, and you know, it kind of shot down that argument. But so think before you write, put something in writing, especially that. So anyhow, Mark, Alicia was interviewing Rachel. Once they gave us the go-ahead, let's look at Nassar. We'll delay these other stories. Marissa Kwiatkowski was dealing with the girl in California. The young lady in New York wasn't ready to come forward and be a source on the record, but what she told us helped us cement, you know, that this was an issue. And so my job was to try to reach out to Nassar, and that, you know, was the lesser of the evils, obviously. You know, I expected to send my email, get a no comment, and go on to something else because, you know, why is a guy like this going to talk to us? So anyhow, I called the medical clinic where he worked at Michigan State University, and they said he wasn't there, and they put me on hold, and they came back and said, well, I don't know when you can reach him. It was kind of weird. In hindsight, he had already been notified that Rachel Denhollander had gone to the police. And so I sent emails to Nassar at his home and at the university, and I sent him in the one afternoon, and the next morning I came in and I had 2 emails in my inbox from Nassar, and you know, it shocked me once I read them. The first one was, I'm so sorry these women misunderstand me, and it's a line he used over and over, that these women misunderstand what I was trying to do. I was only trying to help them, and I'd love to talk to you and explain what's going on. Could you come to my house? And it's like, hell yes, I can come to his house, you know, because I was expecting to talk to my attorney, no comment. And then the second email that was in my inbox had come about an hour later, and he said, I've spoken to my wife, and she thinks it's better that we meet at my attorney's office. So Still, it wasn't shut down. So immediately sending back said, yes, give me your attorney's contact information and we'll set something up. So we called, got on a conference call with the attorney that afternoon, and there were about three things that brought about Nassar's ultimate downfall, and one of them happened in that phone call with his attorney. And we negotiated a meeting, and his attorney was adamant. He said, Dr. Nassar never has penetrated any of these young girls. He does not use an intravaginal procedure. He's never penetrated them. Okay, that's on the record. So and it was, I think it was a Wednesday or Tuesday or Wednesday, and I said, I can be there tomorrow at 9 in the morning, you know. And he said, well, I've got something. The next day, I said, I'll come Saturday, I'll come Sunday. And he finally said, come Monday. So that was September 12th. In the meantime, we were wrapping up our story. We knew that a lawsuit was going to be filed in California by the young lady soon. And we wanted to try to meet with Nassar before that lawsuit was filed, because we thought that would, the filing of the lawsuit would probably shut his attorney down. So that was one of the reasons I'd pushed to go for the weekend. So I drive to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and from Indianapolis, which is about 4 or 5 hours, and meet Nassar and his attorney on September 12, 2016 at the attorney's office. And when we get there, Nassar wants to talk to me off the record first, and stupid mistake, I let him do that. And I thought it would maybe engender a little more give and take, but he showed me these videos that he'd made, training videos, and they were I told people that they bordered on child porn. You know, that you couldn't see a girl's face, but you saw a young girl laying on a table with a pair of very short briefs on, and I can't remember what the term was, but he would grab the briefs and kind of make them into a thong and put them in the cleft of the girl's buttocks. And then he started massaging, and, you know, he would be working on her thigh, and he said, you know, he would tell me, he said, you could see how they could be mistaken. I have to get very close to get this ligament that runs in there, but, you know. And so he showed me that, and then he showed me all these magazine articles, and he had textbooks where he had written things. And, you know, it's a dog and pony show, and again, later we found out he had told this story at least 2 other times, and it had gotten him out of trouble. And so as he's showing me this stuff, I get a text, and it's one of my colleagues who tells me that the lawsuit's been filed in California. And I probably didn't have to do this, but I did. I stopped the interview and I said, look, I've just been made aware a lawsuit's been filed. I don't want to try to, you know, surprise you or do anything that untoward. You know, I want to make sure you're aware of that before we go onto our on-record conversation. And his attorney said, can I get a copy of the lawsuit? So I had one of my colleagues email the lawsuit, and Nassar and his attorney went into a conference room, and about 15 minutes later they came back out and said, well, we'll make a brief statement, but because of the lawsuit we don't think we can comment anymore, and we're going to stop the interview. Backing up a little bit, the interview, Nassar was very interesting. I think he would describe himself as a nerd, kind of, anyhow, but he was very awkward in the social graces. You know, when you shook his hand, he was kind of weird, and but when he was telling his story, he could see kind of a switch flicked, and he had that pitch down, or that spiel where this is what I do, and, you know, and covering. And again, at the time, I wasn't even sure if he was a molester or if he was a doctor doing an uncomfortable procedure on young patients. And but at one point when he was doing the massaging in the video, I said, well, why don't you wear gloves? I said, you know, I talked to lots of people in the medical field, and they say that you wouldn't do this procedure without wearing a glove. And he says, well, I need to have the feel, the tactile feel. And they said the latex gloves, you know, impair that. And when he did that, his eyes would flutter, and, you know, we all probably look at people for body language, you know, and tightening up or whatever. And, you know, I fancy myself a semi-detective for that kind of thing and watch it. But it's a pretty basic stuff, and you could tell he would switch back and forth. And when he was controlling the narrative, he was smooth and he was calm. When he lost control of the narrative, he was a different person, and that made me think there was something to it. So anyhow, after they came back out and agreed to make a statement, basically it was Dr. Nassar never digitally penetrated any of these young girls. His procedure has been mistaken. And my last interaction with Nassar, live interaction was with him. He basically teared up and said, "You're going to ruin my career." He said, please, reconsider that this is all a misunderstanding. These women don't understand. They're young girls, and I've never done anything to harm a woman, a young girl. And again, on the verge of begging me not to do the story. And I told him at that time, I said, "We've got a story written. We're going to plug your stuff into it, and the lawsuit stuff, and it's going to run in the next 12 to 24 hours." And so I left the lawyer's office and drove down the street a little bit to a parking lot, got my digital recorder and just kind of unloaded my thoughts and recollections of the meeting, so I'd have some sort of record of them, even though they weren't something I could print, but so I had it down. And then I called my editors and said, "Here's what we've got." That story ran online September 12th of 2016, and that day and the next days this phone call started coming in, and what happened, the critical piece at that point was Nassar's attorney denying the intravaginal procedure, because we had the women calling in and saying, "Bullshit, he penetrated me, he penetrated me, he penetrated me," and it was just this kind of trickle to like a stream starting in the mountains. You see the trickle, and then this huge gush at the end is like these people just kept coming forward, and that one, if he just said no comment or something, we might not have been able to take the next steps with it, and so that. And then we monitored at Michigan State University, was the point of contact for people making complaints against him. They had an online police report database. So we found Nassar's home address. Of course, we knew that. We knew the clinic address. And we watched every day, and it was like the national debt ticker you see in America, where the clock just keeps going. One day it was 16, and then it was 32, and it was 48, and it was 64. And over the course of a couple weeks, we were up into the 30s already. And it was like, we had no idea. Again, Larry Nassar hadn't even been on our radar, and this little tip of the iceberg floating, was down there. Now the number's 350 and probably more. So we wrote several more stories. In the interim, after the response to those stories, Nassar was an icon in gymnastics. We got beat up again. Now it wasn't just the people in Indianapolis protecting their sports complex. It was Nassar's friends and the university who were calling us. "I'm 110% positive, you're just trying to sell papers. This man, I would trust him with my child, blah, blah, blah." And hateful emails and voicemails. You're ruining a man's reputation to sell newspapers. Well, we weren't selling any newspapers more than normal anyhow. And it exploded. And Nassar he'd started a foundation for children with autism. He was running for the school board in his small town in Michigan. And in November, even though we'd come out, and I think by the time the election came around, there were 30-some people who'd come out against him. He still got 20% of the vote in that election. So that's how strong his support was. People weren't believing it. A few days after the election, that all changed, because the FBI and local police went to his house, and it makes for a good story, and I have no reason to doubt it, but it sounds a little dramatic. But the garbage pickup was delayed that day, and one of the officers said, "Let's look in the trash cans." There are trash bins out in front of Nassar's house, and they found hard drives and jump drives, and they found 37,000 images of child pornography, including some young gymnasts, including some of his neighbors. And that's when the tide on Nassar started to turn. That's when his supporters died. That search also involved a young girl, was triggered by, her name's Kyle Stevens, and she was Nassar's next door neighbor, and she was a key to the prosecution because she had never been a gymnast, she had never been a medical patient of Nassar's, but he had molested her at his home multiple times. They were family friends. And actually during the course of this, her family made her apologize for before our story ran out, but when she first raised allegations of the abuse years before, you know, and she was actually ostracized from her father because of her refusal to deny she'd made up these allegations. But she was critical because then that took it out of the medical, the doctor-patient sphere, and that's just a pedophile, you know, harming his next-door neighbor girl. So we wrote about Nassar. Toward the end of the year, we got back to at the urging of our editors, at the end of 2016, we got our other stories all out, and they were very good stories. You know, hundreds of people had been molested in the sport, and we had a great story of one serial molester and how he bounced from about 8 or 10 gyms across the country, kind of just one step ahead of the cops. You know, the gym owners would kick him out and say, you know, we won't say anything, but you've got to move away, and you got to get out of gymnastics and he'd land somewhere else. So we had those kind of stories. But our Nassar coverage, for the most part, kind of wound down at the end of 2016. And we got back to what our main story was. And again, it's much more a U.S.-centric story, but the head of USA Gymnastics was forced to resign because of the policies that we were looking at initially. More recently, the whole board of USA Gymnastics was forced to resign. The head of the U.S. Olympic Committee was forced to resign. The president of Michigan State University was forced to resign. So there was a lot of other kind of ripple effect, but Nassar kind of caught all the attention, and so now people think of us as the Nassar story, which again, it was a tangent. It was kind of like we were fishing for cod and we got a catfish or something, you know, and we got a big fish who bit on our line. And so, you know, that kind of took us out to that. And actually, we wound down our gymnastics coverage for the most part in the summer of 2017. I went on and worked on a project with another reporter on witness intimidation and how that's impacting the high murder rate in Indianapolis. And you know, we were monitoring things going on in gymnastics, but we were actually on to other investigative projects. And then in January, the Nassar case blew back up because of there were, I guess, 3 factors that made it a national story. First, in the fall, in December of 2017, Michaela Maroney, Olympic gymnast, came out and revealed that she'd been paid $1 million to stay quiet about being molested by Nassar. And then Allie Reisman, a famous U.S. gymnast, Gabby Douglas, Simone Biles, members of the U.S. Olympic team, came forward. And suddenly, people who didn't care about, that's not the right way to say it, but they weren't all worked up about the club level gymnasts, the kids in the Little League gym kind of thing. They were now outraged because America's sweethearts from the gymnastics, from the Olympics were involved. So that started generating more attention to our project and to our work. And then the judge in Michigan at Nassar's sentencing made a very bold move, and I've covered courts for years and I've never seen anything like it. She would not accept Nassar's plea bargain unless all of his victims, any victim who wanted to come forward and testify, any survivor, got a chance to testify. And it went on for a week and a half, and I don't know, you probably saw internet clips or news clips, and that's what blew it up. And in America, many places don't allow cameras in courtrooms, and thank God Michigan had cameras in the courtrooms because they, you know, that it was just impossible to watch that stream of raw emotions pouring out day after day of these young women, strong young women who had had a chance to think about it. And you know, I knew a number of these women, and I'd talked to them, but our interviews had been more about, you know, what did he do? We need specifics of the act, and we didn't really step back and get, how has this impacted your life? And those victim impact statements, you know, how they girls one girl committed suicide, at least another one had tried. You know, they'd had emotional problems, they couldn't have relationships, they didn't have trust with men, and then this horrible thing, you know, just blew up, and then it was impossible to ignore. And then, you know, it comes back around to the prosecutor saying, you know, if it hadn't been for these reporters who believed Rachel Denhollander when we first got the call, he'd still be in his office down the street from here molesting young girls. And, you know, I'd love to think that was true. You know, it would have come sometime, but there were 2 times, one in 2014 and one in about 2007 when people went to authorities about Nassar. And both times he was cleared. The first time was at university authorities, and a bunch of his friends and colleagues from the medical school came and supported him, and he did his dog and pony show with the same stuff that he showed me in the lawyer's office, and they said, okay, the girls misunderstood. Another one, in 2014, they went to a police department, and it was a small town police department. They were wowed by this Olympic doctor, and again, they believed the doctor and not the girl. And to their credit, after this all blew up, the police department issued an apology to the young lady and said they had not done it right. But in both of those cases, and this is where the free press comes into it, and where I kind of start my my heroic music in the background, is in both those earlier cases, Nassar was controlling. They weren't out in the public sphere. Nassar controlled the narrative. He was able to explain it away. And when it got in the newspaper, and when his attorney said he never penetrated any of these young girls, then it was out of his control. And Nassar couldn't bring his friends in. He couldn't control it. And that's that was the tipping point. And if it hadn't been us, it probably would have been someone else. But again, it was one of those things where, as an investigative reporter, you never know. You're pulling string and trying to see what's at the other end of that line. And Larry Nassar was at the other end of our line, in addition to a lot of other people, and we had never expected it. And it was an amazing experience. It's been transformative to me. I'm here in London. I've been to Alaska. My colleague's in Brazil right now. She's going to Africa later. They're doing a documentary about us. It's craziness. I can't do journalism when I love it. I like talking about journalism. I don't like being in the documentary because. And I've got a face for newspaper, so we'll leave it at that. And I've got a very good investigative piece in the works that I want to get back to so badly. And there's a little bit of gymnastics stuff, but we've kind of other people have jumped on it and done great work and are doing great work. And I think it's time for us to step back and let me do something else. So that's my hope. And I'll answer any and all questions, so fire away.